Well, thank you for joining us on the Jim Bohannan Show tonight at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, online at jimbotalk.net. We're going to look at air travel tonight. Considerably different, of course, from what it used to be. Fewer flights to fewer places, cabins packed. We, of course, all have heard the old line, too much aluminum, not enough concrete, this sort of thing. Well, flying is more difficult, of course, security concerns, restrictions, cost of fuel, and the like. And something you may not be aware of tonight is a problem in the cockpit. The aging of the nation's pilots. And we're going to talk with return guest Cathy Banks, Vice President of the firm Legacy Travel. Hi, Catherine.
Hello.
Good to have you on the program tonight. I hadn't thought about this, but back when we had a very large Air Force, a lot of people put in their time in the Air Force, of course, as pilots, and in this particular case. And so they essentially, the airlines were using the Air Force and, for that matter, the Marine Corps and the Navy as essentially its farm team for experienced pilots, and there are fewer of those available.
Right, exactly. The military hasn't been a major source of commercial pilots for many years now. People that are becoming pilots are having to pay for that training.
And if you've ever noticed the stereotype, of course, of your airline pilot is the graying individual, distinguished to be sure, but graying. I guess there's a certain amount of truth in that. I understand that nearly 1,400 pilots retired last year, more than double the previous year.
Right, and I think it's supposed to increase again this year. So I think that mandatory retirement at age 65, and lots and lots of pilots are getting right there.
Does that really make a lot of sense to you? I mean, in this day and age, I can remember my grandmothers who used to sit on the front porch literally in a rocking chair and knit. And today, grandmothers of the same age are rollerblading. We're a more active society, and I'm not sure. Obviously, there need to be fitness tests and whatever, reflexes, eyesight, whatever. That's fine. But just simply saying, well, you're 65 tomorrow. You won't be fit to fly. Today, of course, since you're still 64, you're fine and dandy. It seems rather arbitrary to me, Catherine.
It does seem arbitrary. I agree. I think there need to be more objective criteria than just a number.
Yeah. You've got, of course, the latest regulations on the amount of rest that pilots must get between flights, which right off the bat, of course, I'm not a frequent flyer, but I travel a fair number of times a year. I don't know, 8 or 10 times probably flights a year at least. I certainly don't want a pilot who's bleary-eyed, who's popping pills like the stereotypical trucker. And no, they don't all do that, but you know what I'm talking about here. On the other hand, I don't know how realistic are the rules for pilots in terms of turnaround and this sort of thing.
Well, like you, I'm all for well-rested pilots, but I think there has to be some balance here. I mean, was it that big of a problem before the guidelines just changed? I'm not sure. Flying was still extraordinarily safe, and I certainly would never argue against pilots getting rest because that just seems foolish. They certainly have put in much more stringent guidelines that it makes it to where each pilot can't fly as many hours because there's rest in between each one of their flights, and it does spread the pilots more thin. Yeah,
absolutely. And there's also the issue of pay. There's a wide difference. Sure, if you, at least at one time, I'm not sure what the pilots have had to give back in terms of pay, but at one time, certainly a pilot for a major carrier like an American or United or what have you, or a Pan Am or a TWA back in the day, they were making well into 6 figures. But boy, you can find people, I understand now, that are making below 20 grand who are flying some of these little puddle jumper airlines.
Right. The big difference is going to be your regional carriers versus your major carriers, like you said, your American, United, Delta, and so forth. These little regional carriers like your Republic Air and American Eagle, and just, pick yours in the part of the country where you live, Horizon up in the Northwest, they make hardly nothing. And even first officers now, they just changed the training guidelines. Even first officers on a regional carrier have to have 1,500 flight hours to get that job, whereas previously they only had to have 250 flight hours. And like you just mentioned, they're not being trained in the military anymore, and those flight hours cost money. So it costs $100,000, $150,000 to be trained for this job that could start at $18,000 a year.
So what are you going to do? Well, let's look at Brian Bedford, Chief Executive at Republic Airways, who says that last month that they are removing 27 of their 243 aircraft from service, over 10% of their aircraft. Why? Because of a lack of qualified pilots. Now, to the extent that supply and demand operate here, one would assume that the regional airlines need to pay more for pilots, which means that the ticket prices probably need to go up, which it would be ironic because anybody who's ever booked flights on one of the travel services, Travelocity or Orbitz or whatever you happen to go to, it's the little airlines that charge you an arm and a leg. If you want to fly from Chicago to Denver or something, you can find some pretty good fares. But if you want to try to travel from, let's say, Rockford, Illinois to Fort Collins, Colorado, it's those last little legs that will break your back, which is ironic if, in fact, they're paying their pilots dirt wages, and presumably they all pay the same for jet fuel, which is an assumption I'm making here. How come the little flights are the ones that are costing so much?
They are flying the smaller aircraft, so whereas in your example from Chicago to Denver, that aircraft 200 or 300 people, but on a little regional jet, 50 people on a big one, 20, 30 people on a smaller one. There just aren't as many people to spread the cost around. This regional jet situation, the GAO report that just came out, it seemed to indicate that there are pilots there. The supply of pilots is there, but they're working for foreign carriers. Like, for instance, I just read that Emirates Airlines, their first officers start at $83,000 plus a generous housing allowance and some other really great benefits, versus these little regional carriers here that start you at $16,000. And so you've got pilots that are going to other countries to work, or in other industries altogether to work, because you can't raise a family on what these entry-level jobs are offering.
Well, now, they're making a go of it, these other airlines, and again, you pay what the freight demands. You're not going to staff a hospital cardiac ward with surgeons by paying them all $25,000 a year. You charge what you have to charge. I don't see the problem here.
Well, there's a couple of things. When you're talking your foreign flag carriers, a lot of those are subsidized by those foreign governments, whereas here, at least in theory, our airlines are private industry, and so they're not routinely subsidized by the taxpayers. So the economics are a little bit different. So it does make it different. But you're right, it is purely an economic question, like a lot of things are. Are passengers willing to pay what it's going to cost to put a pilot in that cockpit? And I guess, according to all the reports that we're reading over the next 2 years, we're going to find out.
Well, if you have to get someplace, I mean, there aren't a lot of options. Now, when I travel up and down the East Coast, just because of the availability of Amtrak and the lack of the hassles that go with air travel, if I've got to go to, say, Philadelphia or New York City or Boston, I'll take the train. Not only is it cheaper with fewer hassles, but it's actually, I've found it's actually faster if you count the time traveling to and from the airport, as opposed to a train station, which is downtown. I can get from Washington, D.C. to New York City faster on the train, just because I don't have to fight the traffic getting from the airport to where I'm actually going. So it's an odd circumstance. I'm wondering, since we don't have the option of a major nationwide train service in this country, you don't have decent passenger train service except in a very few highly populated corridors. If I've got to get somewhere, I got to get somewhere. I mean, I'm not one of these people who says, gee, I've got an extra $500 that's burning a hole in my pocket. Let's fly somewhere. If I'm scheduling a flight, it's because I need to go there, and I need to go there when I'm trying to get there. So, if it costs me $500 or if it costs me $700, well, then I'll probably pay the $700. I don't see the economics here. Unless there are that many people out there who are discretionary flyers that simply fly based on what the cost is. I don't. I fly because I have to fly, usually.
Well, but at a certain point, the equation would change. So, okay, yes, you'd go at 500, and yes, you'd go at 700. Let's say it was 1,500. Do you still have to go? You know, there's a certain point where you would say, well, no, I can figure out a way not to go.
Well, I suppose most of the times I fly, there are reasons that transcend the cost. Maybe you were talking 10 grand or something, that might be persuasive. But anyway, more to come. We'll continue our discussion here tonight because it's something that you've seen the symptoms of it. You may not have thought about why, but if there are fewer flights somewhere, in some cases it is, as the Republic Airlines decision was, they can't find the pilot, so they have canceled over 10% of their flights. 1-866-50-JIMBO, and we'll be back with Cathy Banks of Legacy Travel in just a moment. It would be the Jim Bohannan Show. We're talking to Cathy Banks, Vice President of the firm Legacy Travel, online at legacytravel.com. I note here just a summary of some of the pay. This is hourly pay at some of the regional airlines like American Eagle, Republic, Mesa, and so on and so forth. They average out for a co-pilot 1 year experience $23.73 an hour. Okay, up to a 15-year pilot may make $91.64 an hour. But for some of these, given the responsibility and the training required, this does not seem pay really commensurate with keeping a lot of these pilots. So what are you expecting to see, Cathy? I mean, if in fact we're not prepared to subsidize the airlines, are we just simply going to say, okay, if I live in a medium-sized city that now has some modest airline service, that's over with? Now I got to drive 200 miles to the nearest big city airport or take the bus?
Well, I think it's going to follow suit. We used to have X number of airlines, and now we have less and less and less airlines. I think we're going to have less and less and less cities where less and less flights fly in and out of. And like so many other things, I think it's going to end up being an economic question. Are people going to be willing to pay what it's going to cost to do that? But I do have a suggestion.
Okay.
I think that when we board a flight, we should pass the hat, and everyone pay what they're willing to pay to have a really qualified pilot fly the airplane. What do you think?
Well, it's an interesting thought. If it were a case of that particular flight, yeah. We have a high school freshman up here running the plane today, but we do have experienced pilots waiting back in the terminal. So, yeah, I'd kick in for that. I don't know that most of us would honestly do that. It's an interesting thought, but we are nickel and dime. See, the one thing about the airlines that bugs most of us anyway, we get nickel and dime for every stinking thing. We got a fee for this and a fee for that. Baggage fee. I'm waiting for a fee to avoid having to carry the bags out to the tarmac. I'm waiting for the coin-operated toilet and the coin-operated oxygen masks. They nickel and dime me so much anyway, which is so pointless. It's just every time it's just another little pinprick of irritation when they could just add it to the overall fee. I mean, who knows how much a flight costs anyway? My goodness, I'm sure there have been many flights in this country in which you've got people flying, let's say, from Cincinnati to Pensacola, and every single person on that flight is paying a different rate to go to exactly the same place with exactly the same service. So I don't understand why the airlines feel it necessary to nickel and dime us like that.
Well, I would venture to say that most flights you've ever been on are like that. If you were to poll everyone sitting in every seat, I would say almost everyone pays a different rate because when you buy it and what day you're going and coming back, and a million different questions. So, yes, you're absolutely right. Everyone pays a different fare.
Well, to say that I find this particularly fair, I mean, I fly not out of the love of flying. When I first started flying, I just loved it. I've never been a white knuckler. I think it's beautiful up there and look down on the ground, passing below, and the clouds and all. It's a wonderful, scenic panorama, and I do enjoy that aspect. Obviously, security, well, I can gripe about it like we all do, but there's nothing you can do about that. You do what you have to do. But in terms of a lot of the practices of the airlines, fewer and fewer amenities, no meals or anything like that, less and less room, you need a shoehorn and a jar of Vaseline to get into your seat, et cetera, and so on. For the most part, for me, flying, I got to tell you, I tolerate it. Okay. It's not, hey, I get to go to Chicago. It's, I've got to go to Chicago.
Uh-huh. Yeah, our family's going on a vacation day after tomorrow, and we're actually, we're here in Dallas, and we're driving down to Galveston to get on a cruise ship for a week. And it's been so interesting to me packing because I'm not having to bring the airline concerns into my thought process. So this is going to be new and very interesting for us.
If you're at a travel agency like Legacy Travel, how do you compete with people who say, hey, I'd rather just log on to Orbitz or Travelocity?
Well, the fact is that when online booking was new, it was very fascinating to everybody, and it was very novel that everyone could access this unlimited information. And then as the years have transpired, people are like, oh, no, that's unlimited information. So how do I know what I can trust? And while this was a nice thing for this person, how do I know if they wanted the same things that I do? And can I trust the integrity of whoever put this information up here? So first the information was novel, but now people are more wanting somebody to curate the information for them, and that's the role that we fill.
When I look at these, and of course, when I go to a website like that, which I do, I always try, I do it ranked by airfare, okay? And I often wonder, is that really the cheapest available? I really wonder about that sometimes. Or if for example, seniors as opposed to the general public or people with children, are they all getting the same breaks on this sort of thing? In other words, to what extent is that cheapest available fare really another way to stick it to me?
Well, and I tell you, if you're looking at online booking sites, they do accept money from the airlines and hotels and whatnot to display. They pay to be displayed first, and so you may very well be getting biased information depending on who you look. So that's also the advantage of a travel agent is that nobody's paying us in the back door to do anything. So plus we sit there and look at airline fares and vacation prices all day long, and so while you're looking like, okay, well, this is the round-trip fare on what I'm considering doing, a travel agent might be able to say, have you thought about going on Saturday instead of Thursday or whatever the case may be, wherever you're going? Suggest something that you haven't even thought of before. So that's where we bring the value to the table.
Fair enough. Real quick question here. Are we going to have one airline left in this country?
I hope not. Knock on wood, I really hope the consolidation is about coming to an end. I really think and hope so, but I could be dead wrong.
Well, in any event, as always, thank you very much. Cathy Banks, again, and look at a number of issues, but especially this shortage of qualified pilots, and no sign that's going to get anything but worse, frankly, boys and girls. Stay with us. More to come on the Jim Bohannan Show.